The things you're going to need to make this t-shirt quilt my way are 30 t-shirts of your choice. Now I'm a pretty beefy boy, so a lot of my shirts are 2X's, extra larges, and very few larges. Now I'll be using 30 graphic tees, so each one has a graphic on it. If you didn't care if each of your blocks had a graphic, you would just need 15 shirts, and then you could just use the back and the front to get your blocks. Now I always like to pick up graphic tees that I find funny at the Goodwill for 99 cents or 59 cents when I have them, so I have plenty of shirts. You're also going to need some fusible stabilizer. Today I'll be using the T319T, and this is midweight to heavyweight fusible stabilizer by Pellon. Now I used about 15 yards altogether, and what I did was I just went on Amazon. It comes in 10-yard bolts, and I just got 2 of them. For the backing, I'm going to use this gray fleece. I have about 4 yards here, and I'm hoping that's enough. I'll let you know throughout the video if it's not. Now this quilt's not going to have any batting, but to tie the layers together, I will be using some crochet thread. I'll be using my iron and ironing board and sewing machine with matching thread. I don't think I forgot anything, so let's get started. The first thing I did was go ahead and take my smallest shirt, which is this large one, and I measured out to see the biggest block I can get from this shirt, which happens to be 15 inches. Now this is my smallest shirt, like I said, it's a large, so I know all the rest of my shirts won't have any problem getting that 15 inches out of there. So the next thing I do is with my fabric scissors, I'm just going to cut up the side of the shirt on one side. Just like that. I'm going to come up here on the other side and do the same thing. And then just cut across the top. And since I won't be using this back, I'm going to save this for a different quilt later on. Now that I have the front all cut out, I'm just going to set this aside for 1 minute and grab your Pellon. With my fusible stabilizer, since I'm going to be using 15-inch blocks, I'm going to cut a 15-inch square out of my Pellon. Just like that. And I would go ahead and cut out all 30 pieces that you need. Then you want to take your t-shirt. I'm going to lay it on my ironing board so that the print is facing down. And I'm just going to smooth it flat, but don't stretch it. Then I'm going to take my fusible stabilizer, the bumpy side or the glue side, I'm going to put it face down, and I'm just going to eyeball it somewhere here in the center, trying to get the most of my graphic. And now comes the long, tedious, boring part, ironing. I'm going to take my pressing cloth, I'm going to lay it over my t-shirt, and I can see right through my pressing cloth of where my iron-on fusible is. So I'm going to take my hot iron and I'm going to iron this to the manufacturer's instructions. So what they say is to press your iron down, leave it for 15 seconds, and then move it over. When you're done with that one spot, you're going to pick it up, overlap it by just a little bit, and press it down. Now you can see why this takes so long. This is a perfect time to let someone come and help you. Whether it be a friend or if you have a child that you trust with the iron, this would be a great project. And if you're by yourself, it's a good thing to pop in a movie, put in your favorite music or something, because it's going to take a while. Alright, now that you have it all fused down, I just like to check to make sure I have it all down, and right up here I can still see some glue dots. So I'm going to put my cloth back and repress that area. So now we just want to cut this out. So since I'm very close to the collar here, I'm going to start with this side first. So just following my line here, I'm going to line up one line going this way, and then I'm going to line up going this way to make sure everything's nice and square on my first cut. So now you just want to line up your straight edge here at the bottom and then cut out your 15 inches. And it should look like that. And if you can see right here, the Pellon does shrink a very little bit, but it's not a whole lot. So it won't cause any problems when we're sewing this together. And you just want to do that to the rest of your shirts. If you're doing this with little kids shirts, it's just going to be a smaller block and a smaller quilt. If you want a bigger quilt, more t-shirts, more blocks. So now let's go lay this out. So this quilt is going to be 5 blocks by 6 blocks. Now I'm just going to start laying them out and then rearrange them later. Here's an interesting block where I actually kept the pocket of the t-shirt. So that's going to add a little more interest to your quilt. Alright guys, so I think I'm happy with this layout. I do have one row down here that you guys cannot see, but I think this is going to work. I tried very hard not to get the same 2 colors t-shirts touching. And then I also made sure that all the colors were spread out evenly throughout the quilt, and my eye wasn't really drawn to one section. This orange block is where I'm going to start on my first row. So I'm going to take that one and put it on top of the one next to it. Take those, put it on top, and continue. And this will be pile 1. And I'm going to do the same thing with all 6 rows. Next, I took some paper and labeled it 1 through 6. And the arrows is which way I'm going to press my seams. So the first one will go to the right, and the second one will go to the left, and so on and so on. So now using some pins from Pinhead, I'm just going to put a piece of paper on each one of my rows. And I'm just pinning it to the first block of that row. So now I'm just going to stack pile 1 on pile 2, then on to 3, 4, 5, and 6. And now I'll meet you over at the sewing machine. Alright, now before we go over to the sewing machine, I'm going to take my first block, then I'm going to take my second block, and I'm going to lay it so that the right sides are facing. And since I started in the left hand upper corner of my quilt, I know all of my blocks are going to go to the right. So I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine, and with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to backstitch. I'm going to sew down this right side and backstitch. When I'm done with that, I'm just going to open up the blue one. I'll get the next block in my pile, right sides together, and sew that seam until all of my rows are sewed together. So like I said, I'll be using a straight stitch. My length is a 2.5. I'm going to backstitch. Make sure everything's lined up nice, and just keep sewing. And backstitch at the end. So now I'm just going to open it up, grab my third piece, and do the same thing. I'm just going to continue to do that until all 5 are sewed into my row and that all 6 rows are done, and I'll bring you right back. Fast forward 5 months. I started this video in the beginning of the pandemic, and it's about time that we finish off this quilt. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew my rows together. So first I'm going to sew rows 1 and 2, then 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6. And after that I'll just sew those chunks together until my quilt top is all finished. So I'll see you at the sewing machine. Alright guys, so I'm still using that 2.5 seam allowance, and one thing I forgot to mention is when you're laying out your rows and pinning them together, you don't necessarily have to worry about the edges. You want to start in the middle and work your way out, and if the edges don't match up, that's fine, we can trim it later. So now I'm just going to backstitch and sew all the way down the length of my row, backstitching at the end. Alright guys, so I got my quilt top all sewed together, and now I'm dealing with the backing. Now I got 4 yards of this gray fleece, And of course it was not long enough. So what I did was fold it in half. I sewed with a 1/2 inch seam allowance down the middle here. And I pressed my seams open. And then all I did was go ahead and cut on the fold. So now I have this big long piece of fleece. And now I'm just going to lay my quilt top on top of this. My right side is facing down. You can see my seam is facing up. So on my fleece, the right side is down. And on my quilt top, I'm going to lay it so the right side is facing up. And just to make sure I have enough on all sides, I'm going to match up the middle seam here on my quilt with the seam on my backing. So now just starting in the middle, I'm going to smooth everything out to the edges and I'm going to pin it. So I'm going to put one of these safety pins in each intersection of my blocks as well as in each middle of my block. And that's just going to help me keep this all together, as well as let me know where I need to stick a tie when I tie this together. Alright guys, so I hit a little bit of a snafu. I thought I had enough backing here that I'd be able to do a fold over binding. But I don't. So we're going to have to improvise. 1 second. Alright guys, so what I'm going to do is I have my backing piece facing up now. And then I just went ahead and I laid my quilt top face down. Now I'm just going to go around the edges and pin, and I'm going to leave an 8 to 10 inch opening at the bottom, and that's just for turning purposes. When I get it all pinned around the edges, I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine, and with probably a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'm going to backstitch at one of my pins for my opening. I'm going to sew all the way around, stopping at my last pin and backstitching. Alright guys, so I'm over here at the sewing machine. Here to this pin over here is my 8 to 10 inch opening. And I decided I'm going to do an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to backstitch at the beginning. And I'm actually going to bump up my seam allowance to 3 to even a 3.5. Alright, so I'm coming up to my corner, so I'm going to use my ruler. I'm going to measure an inch away, and I'll just stick my pin there. And then I'm going to sew up to my pin. I'm going to stop with my needle down, raise my presser foot, and spin. And just keep sewing. So now I'm just going to go ahead and clip all 4 corners, making sure you don't go through your threads. And then I'm going to just turn the whole thing right side out. And you want to be careful pulling all this fabric through your opening. You definitely don't want to stretch out your fleece or pop any seams. So now I'm just going to come over to my opening. I'm going to give it a little tug. And then just pin that opening closed. Now I'm just going to take this back over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end, and I'm going to sew all the way around, making sure I catch my opening and sew that closed. Alright guys, so it should look like that. So the next thing we're going to do is tie this together. In my original t-shirt quilt, I'll show you at the end of this video, I tied in every intersection as well as in the middle of each block, and I tied it from the back side. On this one I'm going to do it a little different. This quilt is going to go to Mother. It has all 4 of her boys' t-shirts in here. So I'm going to have the ties facing up. And instead of doing every corner, I'm just going to do the middle of each block. Now if I go to washes and there's any problem with moving fabric or any popping seams, I will add more ties. So I have a large needle here. I actually can't find my ribbon needle, what I usually use. This I actually use to tie up my book signatures when I make my junk journals. And I have a long piece of crochet thread. So I'll start on this white block right here. I think it'll be easiest to see. So I'm just going to go down through the layers. I'm going to come up about 1/4 or a 1/2 inch away. I'm going to loop my tail through the hole 2 times and pull. And you don't want to pull too snug, otherwise you'll get a little pucker. And then just wrap your thread tails 2 more times through the hole and then pull it tight. And then I'm just going to snip away the threads, leaving a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch thread tail. And I'm going to do that to each and every block. Alright guys, so here is the finished quilt. It measures about 70 inches wide by 83 inches long. It's pretty hard to get it all in frame, but I think it turned out great. Now like I said, if you do not like the little strings hanging out on the top here, you can always just have them on the bottom. That's no problem. And there's what the back looks like. Now even though this doesn't have any batting in between, it's still a pretty heavy quilt and will keep you nice and warm. And here is the very first one that I ever did. It was about 6 years ago, 7 years ago now, when I started sewing. And I went ahead and I flipped the back to the front for my binding. And as you can see, I tied it to the back. And here's what this one looks like. I hope you give this easy but time-consuming project a try. If you like this video and want to see more of my videos, go down below and hit that big red subscribe button and give this video a big thumbs up. If you have a question about this video or any of my other videos, or would just like to leave a suggestion for a future upcoming video, leave me a comment. I'll leave a link down below if you'd like to check out my Etsy store to see what I got selling over there. Check out all my other links down below if you'd like to support this channel. And as always, thanks for watching, happy sewing, and I'll see you next time.